There have been two major developments in the Phala Phala matter as it relates to President Ramaphosa. The first one is that today, just a few hours ago, the NPA announced that it is not going to prosecute anybody in respect to the Phala Phala case. This is what was said by the Director of Public Prosecutions in Limpopo. Here's the statement. The Director of Public Prosecutions in Limpopo, Adv Mukhali Ivy Thenga, has taken a decision not to prosecute anyone in relation to the Phala Phala case. This decision follows a comprehensive investigation process that was conducted by the Directorate for Priority Crimes Investigation, DPCI, following a complaint laid by Mr. Arthur Fraser with the South African Police Service, SAPS. The criminal complaint was registered against the President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa. The complainant requested the SAPS to investigate the conduct of the President and that of Major General Wally Rode, alleging that it amounted to the commission of money laundering and corruption. The investigations also covered any possible contravention of the Income Tax Act 58 of 1962 and the Exchange Control Regulation of 1962. This was subsequent to the break-in and theft of an undisclosed amount of US dollars at the Phala Phala farm Bela Bela, Limpopo. The decision not to prosecute was taken by the DPP after a careful assessment of all available evidence presented to the prosecutors by the DPCI. She concluded that there is no reasonable prospect of a successful prosecution based on the evidence contained in the docket. The DPP made her decision in line with the prosecution policy of the NPA, which states that a prosecutor, in deciding whether to institute criminal proceedings against an accused person, must assess whether there is sufficient and admissible evidence to provide a reasonable prospect of successful prosecution. Various factors must be considered when the prosecutor evaluates evidence, notably 1. The strength of the case for the state, 2. The availability of evidence, 3. Whether the state witnesses are likely to be credible, 4. The admissibility of evidence, 5. The reliability of evidence, and 6. The strength of the case for the defense. And this statement ends there. It was issued by the Director of Public Prosecutions in Limpopo. In case you're wondering, what were the criminal issues in a little bit more detail? I'm going to explain them now. And just to frame it for you properly. In terms of the Currency and Exchange Act 9 of 1933, read with the relevant regulations, foreign currency cannot, as a general rule, be used as legal tender in South Africa. Regulation 8 specifically states, no person shall, except with the permission of the Treasury and in accordance with such conditions as the Treasury may impose, make or receive payment except in the currencies specified by the Treasury. According to the Currencies and Exchange Guidelines for business entities issued by the Reserve Bank, travel agents, hotels, restaurants, shops, and other persons whose business is directly related to the tourist industry may apply for permission to accept foreign banknotes and foreign currency, travelers' checks from visitors to South Africa as payments for goods and services. However, this is on the condition that they provide a written undertaking that the foreign currency will be sold to an authorized forex dealer not later than the following business day after the transaction. A record of all transactions must be kept and be available for inspection by the Financial Surveillance Department. Regulation 6.6 further states that any foreign currency held by people who reside in South Africa shall not be sold, transferred, or otherwise disposed of without the permission of the Treasury and in accordance with conditions as the Treasury may impose. Regulation 22 states that it is a criminal offense to contravene any of the regulations, to make any incorrect statement in any declaration required in terms of the regulations, or to refuse or neglect to furnish any information which he or she is required to furnish under these regulations. The maximum penalty for such a fine is a fine not exceeding 250,000 or imprisonment for a period not exceeding 5 years. So these are very serious regulations and violations if you violate them. Section 3B4 of the Prevention of Corrupt Activities Act says, this section prohibits any person from directly or indirectly offering or giving money to somebody else in a manner that amounts to an unauthorized or improper inducement to do or not to do something. So basically, you can't receive money for bribes. So this is just more detail around what were the potential crimes that the president was alleged to have committed by Arthur Fraser. We know for a fact that there was an amount of money that was stored in the president's furniture at Phala Phala Farm. We know that that money was stolen in 2020 or thereabouts. And we know that the theft of that money was not reported to the police. So we also know that then there was a story around how the money was for buffaloes that were never collected by a gentleman known as Hazim Mustafa. So let's try to think about all of this and try to keep an open mind, and also try to consider why could certain things be happening at particular moments. In politics, timing is always something that you need to be asking yourself about. So why is this announcement happening now? Just a few days ago, you may have missed it because there have been a lot of conversations that have been happening, but the Constitutional Court set down a date for the hearing of the Phala Phala matter, and that is called a notice of set down. So this is what the notice of set down said. Two things, not a very long notice. Number one, please take note that the above matter has been set down for hearing on Tuesday, 26 November 2024 at 10 a.m. Number two, your attention is drawn to the provisions of the directions issued by the Chief Justice on 20 April 2023, a copy of which is attached here too for your information. So as you know, the EFF is taking this matter to the Constitutional Court. What they are saying is that the decision that was made by the National Assembly, the vote to not go to the impeachment inquiry, was irrational, and they're asking for a variety of things to be done there. We'll talk about that just now. But this announcement is something that a lot of people were wondering, when is it going to happen? So it happened, I think it was last week, late last week, and now we are now in this position where you are now seeing that the Director of Public Prosecutions in Limpopo is saying we're not going to prosecute. This obviously will change perceptions going into that particular Constitutional Court hearing. But guess what? There's something very interesting that happened. By some strange coincidence, the 26th of November is exactly the same day that the criminal case against the men who stole the Phala Phala money is happening, right? This Monday, 3 suspects appeared in court. These are the suspects who are accused of stealing millions of dollars worth of cash from President Ramaphosa's game farm in 2020. It's Emanuela David, Ndilanasho Joseph, and Froliana Joseph, right? They face charges that include housebreaking and theft. So these are the 3 individuals. The 3 of them appeared at a regional court in Limpopo where the case was postponed, get this, until the 26th of November. Bail was extended for the Joseph siblings, Froliana, I think she was the maid for Mr. Ramaphosa, and Ndila Nasho Joseph is her brother, and Emanuela David is the other criminal who was involved. Bail was extended for the siblings, and David is currently in custody for stealing this money from the president's sofa. So 26 November is going to be a big day in the Ramaphosa presidency, and it's going to set things up for some political contestation, right? So there's going to be a split screen. One side is going to be looking at Limpopo, and the other side is going to be looking at Braamfontein, where the Constitutional Court is located, right? Now, just to give you an idea what the EFF is going to be trying to speak about, right? In its written legal submissions to the Constitutional Court, the EFF has argued that the rejection of the panel's report was a breach by the National Assembly of its constitutional duty to hold the president accountable. Though a panel's report may be rejected in terms of Parliament's impeachment rules, it may not be rejected for unlawful reasons, and this is what has been said by the EFF's counsel. The EFF also wants the court to order that the rules governing the impeachment of the president are unconstitutional because they allow a majority party that seeks to protect its party leader to vote down a Section 89 report, even if the panel finds sufficient evidence that the president violated the Constitution. So this case is going to be argued by an advocate who has a lot of experience working in the Constitutional Court, Advocate Camille Premet. And he has said that the ANC's stated reasons, which were given in the House during the debate when they voted down the Section 89 panel report, are patently irrational, right? And that they didn't exercise their minds properly. He said that the ANC claimed that the panel had misunderstood its mandate because the panel had not shown how the information it was given was converted into evidence. If you recall, then former Justice Minister Ronald Lamola also had said in Parliament that the panel had not made a distinction between sufficient evidence, which is what he said the panel would have to make a finding against Ramaphosa, and prima facie evidence, what the panel said it had enough of to make a determination against Ramaphosa. So there are differences in the evidentiary burdens. The role of Parliament is to examine the evidence further. The role of the Section 89 panel is to see if there's a prima facie case. So if Parliament doesn't examine the evidence and if Parliament doesn't look into this issue, then you can't actually get the evidence. So what he's saying is that the question is fundamentally about the rationality of the decision. Parliament can make a decision, but that decision has to be rational. This is the same case, or these are the same arguments that were successful for the DA freedom under law in the Western Cape court. Remember what they said is that when Parliament took a decision to appoint John Hlophe to the JSE, Dr. John Hlophe, that they had an obligation to apply their minds, do so rationally, and do so in a way that was reasonable and justifiable, and that they did not do that because he was impeached, and that would compromise. They said, look, it's an administrative action, and because it's an administrative action, it has to be done with the standards for an administrative action. But even if it isn't an administrative action, it still has to be reasonable and rational. And they said that it wasn't and it didn't meet the test. And the judges said, look, you have a case there. We'll deal with that a little bit later. But that's what the judges said. And this kind of argument has actually been successful in courts before. Now, it's important to go back to what the Section 89 panel was and what it did say, right? You can't just impeach a president. The process is that a motion is brought, a substantive motion is brought, and then from that substantive motion, a decision is taken to go to a Section 89 panel, and such a panel was appointed. And if that panel actually says, Section 89 of the Constitution, if that panel actually says that they've got concerns, then now you go to another stage. So here is who the panel was, just to remind you. Justice Sandile Ngcobo, who was a former Chief Justice of the Constitutional Court of South Africa, he was the chairperson of the panel. This is not, Tom and Jerry. He was one of the most respected Chief Justices of the Constitutional Court of South Africa. So as far as it goes, if you are ranking Chief Justices, he's up there, right? And then another judge who was there was Judge Thokozile Masipa. And she's a former judge of the Gauteng Division of the High Court of South Africa. So somebody who's had a lot of experience sitting as a judge as well as a former Chief Justice. Then initially you had Professor Richard Calland, who's an associate professor of public law at the University of Cape Town. He had to be replaced because the public viewed his inclusion and as conflicted and biased. Well, Richard Calland wrote books against Jacob Zuma. He also was a campaigner for Cyril Ramaphosa, professed his support for Cyril Ramaphosa. So the DA and the EFF objected to the Speaker of Parliament and said, you can't put this guy there, right? So the Speaker then changed and removed Professor Richard Calland and put Advocate Mahlape Selo, who's a respected senior counsel with decades of experience in legal practice and who recently served on the Judicial Commission on State Capture. And he was put on there to serve the panel. By the way, this was all done by Nosiviwe Mapisa Nqakula, and in my opinion, this is probably what got her, into the crosshairs, if you will, of powerful people, and maybe is why she's going through some of the things she's going through. I don't know. I'm just thinking that because she approved that setting up of the panel, maybe there are people that were looking at her funny. But what did the panel say? This is what the panel said. The Section 89 panel. There's a full report. I'm going to maybe do another thing where I really go into all of these legal issues and do a full-fledged expose on all of the legal issues as they pertain to where we are now. So the Section 89 panel said, in light of all of the information placed before the panel, remember this is a panel of a former Chief Justice, a former judge, and a practicing advocate, right? In light of all of the information placed before the panel, we conclude that this information discloses prima facie that the president may have committed a serious violation of Section 96(2)(a) of the Constitution, a serious violation of Section 34(1) of the Prevention of Corrupt Activities Act, a serious violation of misconduct in that the president violated Section 96(2)(b) of the Constitution by acting in a way that is inconsistent with his office, a serious misconduct in that the president violated Section 96(2)(b) by exposing himself to a situation involving a conflict between his official responsibilities and his private business, right? So that's what they actually said there. So having said that, is this the end of the story? Having covered all of this stuff, because this case now has gone through various processes. The public protector said the president did not have a conflict of interest, right? And that he did not conduct any business. I remember this one interview where the journalist asked her some questions and said, but what do you mean he didn't conduct business, etc.? This is the clip. Just watch it and then you'll see for yourself.
He says in that clip, I'm a farmer. I sell. When you sell to get money. You don't sell to not get money. So is that not a job? Is a farmer not a job?
No, it is not.
What is it?
It is two-phrased. You can either have financial interest or you can perform it in terms of a job.
He says I sell.
But
right. So public protector cleared the president, right? And she put a lot of blame on the general Wale Rude, right? Or Rude, however you pronounce his name. Treasury then said, they issued a report as well. They said the transaction was not perfected, meaning that there was no sale. And because there was no sale, the president did not actually come into ownership of the money in the SOFA. He had the money. I read for you what the rules are about conducting business in foreign currency, the expectations, etc. But they said, listen, we couldn't get a hold of this dude who said that he was the owner of the money. Also, because the transaction was not completed, this buffalo had to go to the vet, etc., etc. Therefore, there was no contract of sale. Therefore, the president did not actually conduct business. It's a very technical roundabout explanation from the Reserve Bank governor who's appointed by the president to keep his job, who at that time had not been given another term. So anyway, that's what happened. So that's what they said. This idea of perfected transactions is not one that is typically used for contracts of sale of goods and general products, but it's used for financial instruments. And financial guys, they will come up with some creative answers. And I think that was a way that they found a creative way of saying, listen, he didn't perfect the transaction. So any of the rules which pertain to possession of foreign currency, even though it was in his SOFA, it wasn't his. It was the other guy's money because he hadn't, the transaction was not complete. So it is what it is. So now the NPA has also said they're not going to prosecute. Listen, to be very fair to them, it was always going to be difficult to prosecute this thing because Hazim Mustafa is missing. A lot of people who are supposed to give evidence now are not necessarily going to be likely to give that evidence. For example, the president of Namibia died, right? He was a person who had actually been forthcoming at the beginning, talking about his involvement with the helping of the president's, security guys to find the money, etc., etc. But he's dead now. Dead men tell no tales. So that's another example of complications that exist here. So they're not necessarily being disingenuous when they say that they don't have enough evidence and they're not likely to get a successful conviction. But I think people will still have lots more questions. I think the one-page statement is not necessarily going to be enough, right? The media, so the NPA has said they're not going to prosecute. We know that. That's where things stand right now. The media and the markets really don't have an appetite for this Phala Phala story because, one, they view it as coming out of a pro-Zuma guy, in that Arthur Fraser is a Zuma guy, and this was always something that was being pushed by a political rival of the president, and it's not genuine. This is the view of the markets and the media because of that, right? The media right now is very much in favor of the GNU, and the media owners, right? Rupert owns ENCA, Koos Becker owns Media 24, News 24, and some other platforms, right? They are pushing other business deals which they want to be completed before 2027 when the ANC goes to an elective conference. So, right, if I'm Takealot and I want a government to help me with fighting Shein, Temu, and Amazon, I'm not necessarily going to write negative articles about the guy who's running the country who can frustrate my business opportunities with Takealot, also with my other ventures. We know right now that Rupert is doing the energy exchange, and the energy exchange is the one that is going to be selling energy produced by IPPs to municipalities and businesses and mines, etc., etc. So he owns that. And also they are pushing for other deals because they're trying to expand dark fiber. They're trying to expand some of the other entities that he owns, because you guys may not be aware that Vumatel and all of these fiber companies are actually under the ownership of Rupert. A lot of them are. So if you're Rupert, ENCA, you don't want this to be pushed that much, right? So I don't think that the media is going to be pushing this a lot. So this could very well be the end of the story. This could very well be the point at which Mr. Ramaphosa has almost cleared the issue of his biggest controversy post Marikana, because you must remember, this is not his first big controversy. But nowadays, you don't hear a lot about Marikana anymore. You hear sometimes about Phala Phala, but I don't think that you're going to see a lot of it coming through, especially if the Concord rules in his favor, right? So it's almost the end of the story. If the Concord rules against the EFF, then that's the end of the parliamentary process, because Parliament is the only organ with the power to impeach the president. However, there's a little asterisk that I must put here. Knowing the Gwazam Konto people, who are the ones who apparently may have started this thing with Arthur Fraser, they will probably apply for a private prosecution of the president based on this NPA announcement. They'll ask for that certificate, nolle prosecute, I think it's called, and they will then start the process, I think, of prosecuting the president. And now there's been some case law that has come out around what is the criteria, what is not the criteria for a private prosecution. So it's very possible that they will continue with that. And Jacob Zuma is a man who always has a trick up his sleeve, and I wouldn't put it past them to make an announcement at some point that they're going to go with a private prosecution. So that's where things stand right now. I think, though, that it may be the end of the story in terms of the police and maybe the judiciary if they win on the case on the 26th of November. But I think the public will still have lots of questions. Those questions will be, bruh, you had money on your farm, US dollars. How much? We don't know. Even the police are saying they don't know, because they said undisclosed amount of money, right? And then you kept that money in your sofa. You didn't convert it. You didn't turn it into forex. And, there have been reports in the past about MTN and offshore monies not being declared to SARS, etc., etc. So people will have questions to say, is this linked to that, or is it linked to something else? And there are going to be a lot of questions that still remain. Nobody who is innocent. It's like what John Steenhuisen said. Do you guys remember what John Steenhuisen said when he gave that speech? Let me play what John Steenhuisen said so you hear what he had to say about this issue before he was in the GNU.
Elephant in the room. And that is around the blurring of the lines between Mr. Ramaphosa, the head of state, and Mr. Ramaphosa, the businessman. While police budgets are slashed every year and policing resources in higher crime areas are stretched thinner and thinner, the VIP protection budget of the president and his cabinet is the only police budget that ever goes up. And now we're told that these precious police resources have been put to work serving the private business interests of the president, conducting cross-border investigations, interrogations, and cover-ups. And I'm sure you'll agree, Mr. President, and yes, you may say, Mr. Fraser, but it was your president who deposed an affidavit in court last year telling the court what a good man Mr. Fraser was and why Mr. Fraser should be appointed as head of correctional services. I'm sure you'll agree with Mr. President that the people of South Africa need to know And they have a right to know whether the VIP protection unit is being used as a private debt collection agency. Just as they have a right to know what is going on behind the closed doors of the Phala Phala farmhouse. Now, Mr. President, you've deftly avoided this topic today, but I want you to imagine for a moment what this must look like for an ordinary South African. What a hardworking, tax-paying citizen would make of a remote farmhouse somewhere where tens of millions of rands in foreign currency is being stuffed into the upholstery of lounge furniture. What such a regular citizen should think when told that more than 60 million of this was stolen and the president didn't want anybody to know about it. Where suspects were tracked, rounded up, interrogated, and paid to keep their mouths shut. Normal people, law-abiding citizens, have to save for months for things like school uniforms, for school fees, and children's birthday parties. And they cannot even imagine that kind of money. But you didn't even report it to the police. Never mind getting it back, Mr. President. You didn't want anyone to know it was gone in the first place. Just how much money must you have stashed away in homes if you can afford to turn a blind eye to $4 million? Now, you say that the money was from animals. Well, that may be the case, but I don't think there's many people who truly believe that. You say this was about dirty tricks. You say it was above board, that you've broken no laws. But stuffing millions of rands into couches, hiding the robbery from the police, paying the robbers hundreds of thousands of rands not to say a word, these are not the actions of somebody who has broken no laws. These are the things we see in mafia movies, about cartels, about syndicates and gangsters. If this was all above board and just dirty tricks, you could have ended it right away, Mr. President, by a full, frank and public disclosure. We could have avoided the scenes we had in the House today. We could have avoided the speculation, and we could have avoided us having to ask these questions. None of that would have jeopardized any investigations. An honest and innocent man who was the victim of a massive crime would have wasted no time in clearing these things up. Only somebody with a lot to hide would hide behind the smokescreen of a pending investigation 2 years after the event. So again, Mr. President, I'm asking you, for the sake of the country, for the sake of the presidency, to come clean to the people of South Africa and to this House. No more subterfuge, no more secrets. Whoever's advising you, Mr. President, not to speak out about this and set the record straight is giving you bad advice. How much money was stashed away? These are the questions we need to ask. How much was actually stolen? How did the money enter South Africa? And who brought it into the country? 2 years later on Limpopo, that's a new record, I think. Were the exchange controls of the South African Reserve Bank observed? How much is on the farm right now? How much is at other properties? Why did it not report it to SAPS? You've spoken today about how important it is to report crime and important the SAPS are. Why was it not reported to the SAPS? Were suspects detained? Was Major General Wally Rueda sent to Namibia? Yes, but taxpayers' money is being used to recover it, and that is the problem. Was General Rueda sent to Namibia to go and recover it? On whose authority did he travel there? Who paid for the cross-border investigation? And how much did it cost? Who paid for the security upgrades? We may not be the police, but we're Parliament, and that's our job, to hold the executive accountable. And finally, and arguably most importantly, Mr. President, given your unique obligation as the President to uphold the Constitution and serve the people of the Republic of the country, how do you square this obligation with this sordid detail of the case? Mr. President, every single day that these questions remain unanswered causes irreparable damage to the presidency, which has now gone from paralyzed to petrified. Even the very best case scenario, with the most generous interpretation of what has happened, how you came into possession of the money, why it was concealed in your house, and the reasons for the cover-up are damning. But we're not talking about the best case scenario here, are we, Mr. President? Because if we were, you would have surely reported this matter 2 years ago, or at the very least come absolutely clean about the matter as soon as it came to light. The fact that you've used significant powers and resources paid for by the taxpayers of the country and funded through this budget, which we debate in this House today, to conceal any evidence of this money tells me that the real story is something that the presidency will struggle to survive. Even your biggest praise singers in the media and civil society are now realizing that perhaps the emperor was naked after all. But to understand the real sense of anger and disappointment, Mr. President, that South Africans are feeling, you have to remember that we've been here before. And today's scenes in the House was like Back to the Future. Do you recall the shame of Nkandla and the arrogance of your predecessor? Do you remember the embarrassment of the fire pool video and all the shameless defending being done from the ANC benches? Do you remember the scathing rebuke our parliament received for failing to hold the president at the time, President Zuma, accountable for Nkandla, and the solemn promises that were made thereafter by many people in this House today, never again? Do you remember the words of then Chief Justice Mogoeng in the 2016 judgment when he spoke of your unique obligations, Mr. President, as a first citizen? And I quote, "He is required to promise solemnly and sincerely to always connect with the true dictates of his conscience in the execution of his duties. This he is required to do with all of his strengths and all of his talents and to the best of his abilities. But for the Deputy President, only his affirmation or oath of office requires a gathering of people, presumably that they may hear and bear witness to his irrevocable commitment to serve them well and with integrity." You see, you have to be beyond reproach. You have to be open, you've got to be transparent, and you've got to serve people well and with integrity. But now there's only suspicion, secrecy, and silence. How exactly are you different, Mr. President, from the predecessor? Phala Phala is fast becoming your Nkandla, and it's forever going to be an ugly stain on this presidency. But here's the thing. The presidency is not yours. It belongs to the Republic of South Africa. And when you drag the presidency down in the gutter, you drag our country down with it. Our people don't want two-bit mob bosses with houses stuffed full of dirty cash for our leaders and presidents. They want someone who's going to lead by example, who puts his personal ambitions and business interests a distant second to the needs of our country. And so maybe this whole sordid mess is actually doing South Africa a favor by opening its eyes up to the reality of the ANC. If you were indeed the best that your parties had to offer, Mr. President, then this government's days in office are numbered. And our country's number one goal has got to be to reducing this once mighty and dominant ANC to being a minority party after the next elections. That's my priority, because things aren't going to change while the same people are sitting around the table making the same bad decisions and behaving exactly as their predecessors did. Once South Africa has put the ANC behind it for good, then we can start making progress and moving forward as a nation. And I look forward to that day. Thank you.
I think the public will still have some questions. For instance, I have one question, right? And that question is about this Hazim Mustafa character. Hazim Mustafa did an interview on Sky News, and he showed the people on Sky News documents. He showed them lots of documents. And here's the clip.
Dubai, nearly 7,000 miles from South Africa's seat of power, and home to a man who's been pulled into its politics.
We've been invited to the home of Hazim Mustafa, the Sudanese businessman who has found himself at the heart of what is now known as FarmGate, the political scandal that could see South Africa's president face impeachment proceedings.
An independent inquiry recently found that Cyril Ramaphosa may have violated the constitution after a political rival filed charges of corruption and money laundering. The allegations exposed a secret theft of a large stash of foreign currency from his game farm nearly 3 years ago, Ramaphosa says this man is the source of the cash stashed in the couch. Hazim confirms that he paid $580,000 in cash to buy 20 buffalo from Phala Phala Farm, but says because of COVID, they were never exported. And now he and his South African wife are making headlines.
I'm shocked for sure why they put it there, why didn't send it to the bank? It's also questions there.
On the 23rd of December 2019, Hazim lands in Johannesburg with $600,000 in cash. 2 days later, on Christmas Day, he drives to Phala Phala Farm. He hands over $580,000 for 20 buffalo, then leaves South Africa the next day as Ramaphosa arrives at the farm. Ramaphosa tells staff to deposit the cash, but after he leaves, it's transferred from the safe to the cushions of a couch.
According to Ramaphosa, this money was stolen. So the money is no longer there.
Once I gave the money, the ownership of the money has been transferred from me to him. And the receipt is my evidence for the payment. It's by law or by logic sense.
None of this was public knowledge until June of this year.
At this point, were you aware that the president was involved in the buffalo sale?
From when I hear the news, this is the first time to really know that he's the owner. Because if you saw the structure, for the farm, it's belonged to trustee. And this trustee, I think, belonged to his family. This is the copy of the declaration.
Hazim is now cooperating with the South African authorities and says he's handed over his evidence. He shows us the documents, but won't let us film them.
So this is a declaration form, Hazim Mustafa Mohammed Ibrahim, OR Tambo International, arrivals A. It's got your date of birth. It's got the time, 23rd of December 2019. You arrived at 5:07 p.m. And you declared $600,000 US.
The FarmGate scandal has fractured Ramaphosa's anti-corruption platform and raises questions around his credibility at a critical moment for his party. South Africa's parliament will soon decide whether Ramaphosa will face impeachment proceedings. And as for the man who bought the buffalo, he's ready to take the stand.
Anything to help the justice and to show the truth, I'm here. I have nothing to hide.
Back in the safe?
And not in the couch.
When Treasury was doing their investigation, they actually said that they could not find Hazim Mustafa. They couldn't reach him. So my question is, how could Sky News reach him, but Treasury could not? Also, I think he was lying, right? Because SARS was asked this question by the DA around whether the money was declared or not. And they said that the money, that they could find no records of that money being declared. And they couldn't reach him as well. So how come Hazim was available for Sky News, but he was unavailable for all of the entities in South Africa, like FinServ, when they wanted to find out about the money and all of the stuff? Why did he say he was willing to show the documents and also never showed them to the Section 89 panel? If you read the Section 89 panel report, they said that, listen, we tried to reach this person and we didn't actually succeed. So that's my question about Hazim Mustafa. Like, I have reservations, and I think they're reasonable, around this story about the buffaloes and the money and all of that. But you know what? I'm just a voice on the internet. I don't have any power. You don't have any power. All we can do is observe the politics as it happens, right? What do you think, though? Do you think that this is a final victory for the president and is clear and can now, focus on running the country without distractions around this particular issue of Phala Phala? Let's have a conversation. Till the next one.